The clouds over the Afghan mountains looked like bruised fists, swirling with a darkness that could make even veteran pilots question their choices. Lightning ripped through the sky in sharp white branches, briefly showing the jagged cliffs below where 6 Navy SEALs were trapped under Taliban fire. The radio hissed with tension, voices cutting through the roar of the wind that threatened to destroy anything daring to challenge it. Any station. This is Reaper 6, came the strained call. We're taking heavy fire from several positions. Grid 401s, MR 123456789. We need close air support now. Weather is getting worse. I repeat, we need CAS immediately. At Bagram Air Base, the command center was thick with unease. Weather data showed a nightmare for pilots. Visibility near zero, winds reaching 50 knots, violent turbulence, and hail big enough to smash glass. 3 aircraft had already returned, their crews calling the conditions unsafe. The base meteorologist spoke with grim certainty. Sir, this is way past minimums for safe flight. Category 5 storm, embedded thunderstorms, and dangerous wind shear. My advice is to keep all planes grounded until it clears. But the SEALs could not wait. Their ammo was almost gone, and Taliban forces were moving in from 3 sides. Time was being measured in minutes. Command staff stared at the storm display, knowing that out there, 6 Americans were fighting for their lives, while nature itself tried to block any rescue. That was when Captain Castalanos stepped into the room. Her flight suit was still damp from the rain outside. At 5'4", with sharp eyes that missed nothing, she carried a calm confidence that came from years of proving herself. Some called her Storm behind her back, sometimes in admiration, sometimes not. Some said the nickname came from her habit of flying through weather that grounded everyone else. Others said it was because of missions like the one where she destroyed a Taliban compound alone. "What's the situation?" she asked, studying the tactical screen like a surgeon studying an X-ray. The officer briefed her on the SEALs and the storm. For many, this was a suicide mission. Nix listened without showing emotion, tracking the storm's path in her mind. She had flown through worse, at least she never admitted otherwise to safety officers. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, nicknamed the Warthog, was built to take hits and keep going, much like its pilots. When word spread that Storm might take the mission, the radio room fell silent. Veterans traded knowing looks. Newer crew wondered if the stories about her were real. Lieutenant Rodriguez, her wingman, stepped forward with worry in his voice. "Nix, I've seen the weather report. They're calling it unflyable. Even for you, this might be too much." He wasn't just a colleague. He was a friend who had flown at her side for 18 months, watching her pull off impossible moves. Nix traced the route to the SEALs on the map. The mountains loomed like ancient guards, wrapped in clouds ready to punish any plane that dared enter. Standard routes were blocked by terrain and weather. The only way in was a narrow corridor through the storm's center. "6 men, Rodriguez," she said softly, her voice barely above the rain hitting the roof. 6 men who trusted us to have their backs. He saw that look in her eyes, the one she got before the most dangerous missions. The operations officer broke the silence. "Captain Castalanos, you need to know the risks. Visibility is 0. Turbulence is severe. Winds could flip you. The mission success rate is extremely low. Aircraft loss is very high." Nix understood. This wasn't just about her life. An A-10 cost millions and took years to train a pilot for. But the voices on the radio weren't numbers on a chart. They were men who had gone where others wouldn't, just like her. "I need fresh intel on enemy positions," she said, heading for her gear. "And keep every frequency open. They need to know help is on the way." Everyone knew this wasn't just another mission. It would end as either a legend or a tragedy. The officer finally asked, "Why try when 3 other aircraft turned back? Why think you can succeed?" Nix paused at the door. Lightning flashed, outlining her face. Because they're not just coordinates or voices on a radio, they're Americans. Bringing them home is not optional. She stepped into the storm. The walk to her plane felt longer, each step a fight against the wind. Rain hit sideways across the tarmac. She's ready, Captain, he said, but I've never seen weather like this in 15 years. You sure about this? Nix checked the plane carefully, running her hands over panels, bolts, and seams. In this storm, nothing could be left unchecked. I'm sure, Sergeant. Those SEALs need someone who won't turn back. That's me. Climbing into the cockpit, water dripping onto familiar controls, she began startup procedures. The radio carried chatter from other pilots staying grounded. But Storm was preparing to fly straight into chaos. The twin engines spun up, hydraulic systems hummed, and weapons showed green. Everything was working, which made the mission feel even more unreal. The tower's voice came through the static. Storms 01, conditions are still below minimums. Winds at 60 knots, severe turbulence at all altitudes. Are you sure? Nix looked at the storm. Lightning lit clouds that moved like living beasts. The wind rocked the plane even while parked. 6 men were counting on her to push through. Tower, Storms 01 ready for departure. Direct route to target. Her voice was calm, betraying none of the adrenaline rushing through her. After a long pause, the tower replied. Storms 01 cleared for takeoff. Good luck, Captain. Bring them home. She pushed the throttles forward, sending 3,000 pounds of steel into a destiny written in lightning and blood. Rain swallowed the runway lights. Her world narrowed to instruments guiding her into blackness. Turbulence slammed the plane immediately. Instruments jumped wildly as she climbed through layers of wind shear that would have torn apart weaker aircraft. Storms 01, contact departure on 254.7, the tower said. Now she was alone, flying by instruments in conditions that pushed both machine and pilot to their limits. Hail pounded the canopy, lightning lit her cockpit, and the nav system fought interference. Peaks loomed ahead like sleeping giants, their snowcaps hidden in clouds, promising death to any careless pilot. 40 minutes in, the radio crackled with Reaper 6's voice, calm but urgent. Any station, we're down to our last mag each. Enemies closing in for the final push. If you're coming, come now. Nix answered instantly. Reaper 6, Storms 01 inbound, 15 minutes. Mark with infrared and take cover. Cavalry's coming. The pause before his reply felt endless. Then, Storms 01, we've got 0 visibility. How are you flying in this? I've flown worse, she lied smoothly. Confidence could be as vital as bullets. In truth, she'd never faced anything like this storm. As she dropped lower, mountains closed around her. One mistake, and both she and the SEALs would be gone. Her targeting system picked up the infrared strobes, 6 men clinging to cover while enemy forces crept closer from 3 sides. The A-10 climbed sharply, pushing through clouds that looked solid enough to stand on. Nix was already plotting her second run. Storm 01, that was beautiful. Reaper 6's voice came over the radio. This time there was no tight control, just the raw relief of a man who'd been given another chance to live. Eastern group is gone. Muzzle flashes from the north and west. Can you hit them? Banking hard through wind that tried to flip her aircraft, Nix lined up for another pass. The storm was still raging, her fuel draining faster than planned due to the constant fight to stay in the air. Time was becoming as dangerous an enemy as the Taliban below. She focused on the coordinates Reaper 6 relayed. The second attack run was harder. The enemy had scattered, using the storm for cover just as effectively as she did. Gunfire sparked and vanished in the darkness, like dangerous fireflies. Only when lightning split the sky could she see enough to target. She fired, walking her cannon bursts across likely positions. The weapon's brutal power made up for the precision she couldn't achieve in this weather. Reaper 6, I'm Winchester on 30 Mike, she called, letting him know her cannon was empty. Do you have your perimeter secure? Static crackled before he replied. No movement on thermal. I think you got them all. We're repositioning for extraction. One wounded, can't walk far. We'll need help. Nix stayed overhead, her engines fighting the wind, guarding the team from above. She glanced at her fuel gauge and felt her stomach knot, but she wouldn't leave, not while they were still in danger. The radio broke in with a new voice. Dustoff 77, inbound for medevac. Can you provide weather updates and cover? The medevac pilot's voice was steady, but Nix knew what it meant. Flying into this storm in a helicopter bordered on suicidal. Dustoff 77, winds gusting 60 knots, zero visibility, severe turbulence everywhere. I'll guide you in, but it's going to be rough. She began talking them through mountain passes, knowing one wrong move could flip the helo. It took 45 minutes, her fuel dropping into the danger zone to get them close enough. Dustoff 77 on final approach, the pilot reported. Through her scope, Nix saw the helicopter settle into a small clearing near the seals. Storm 01, Dustoff 77 has Reaper 6. All accounted for, one wounded stable. Thanks for keeping the skies clear. Simple words, but they carried weight. 6 Americans were alive because she had refused to turn back. She turned toward Bagram, but her engines coughed, and her hands tightened on the controls. Fuel gauges flickered. The storm was still between her and safety, and she had almost nothing left in reserve. Flying home became a desperate balancing act. She took a direct route, skimming dangerously low between peaks, trading altitude for speed to save fuel. Lightning struck twice, the blasts briefly blinding her and filling the cockpit with the smell of ozone. Navigation systems blinked out for seconds at a time. The A-10 absorbed it all, but Nix knew she was running on the edge. 20 miles from base, the low fuel warning lit up. 15 miles out, she shut down every non-essential system to stretch the last drops. 10 miles, and she was gliding more than flying. The storm began to break, but she was racing the clock. Her landing at Bagram was like trying to land on a carrier in a hurricane. Crosswinds slammed at her, rain cut visibility to almost nothing. The A-10 hit the runway hard but safe, with less than 5 minutes of fuel left. As she taxied in, crews emerged from shelter. Many had expected this mission to end in recovery, not return. Sergeant Martinez was waiting when she shut down the engines. He had braced himself for the possibility that she wouldn't make it back. The A-10 bore hail dents and burn marks from lightning, but it was intact. "How was the flight, Captain?" Martinez asked, as he started inspecting the damage. "Routine, Sergeant. Just another day at the office," she said quietly, the kind of understatement only combat veterans used. She walked toward the ops center, leaving the scarred but reliable Warthog behind. The debrief lasted 3 hours as intel officers logged every detail. She reported plainly, hiding the emotional weight of what had happened. By dawn, the story had spread across the base. 6 SEALs alive because one pilot refused to believe weather could stop them. The skies were now clear, almost anticlimactic after the night's violence, but the mission had already become the kind of tale pilots told for years. In the ready room, Rodriguez found her looking out at the battered aircraft. "So," he said softly, "how does it feel to be a legend?" She looked up from her paperwork, exhaustion in her eyes, but also quiet pride. "Feels like doing my job, Rodriguez. Nothing more, nothing less."
She walked toward the ops center, leaving the scarred but reliable Warthog behind. The debrief lasted 3 hours as intel officers logged every detail. She reported plainly, hiding the emotional weight of what had happened. By dawn, the story had spread across the base. 6 SEALs alive because one pilot refused to believe weather could stop them. The skies were now clear, almost anticlimactic after the night's violence, but the mission had already become the kind of tale pilots told for years. In the ready room, Rodriguez found her looking out at the battered aircraft. "So," he said softly, "how does it feel to be a legend?" She looked up from her paperwork, exhaustion in her eyes, but also quiet pride. Feels like doing my job, Rodriguez. Nothing more, nothing less. The ceremony ended, but the echoes of that mission stayed with everyone who had been part of it. In the days that followed, Nix returned to her routine as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She still checked her aircraft before every flight, still flew training missions, still joined briefings with the same quiet focus she always had. But those who knew her could see the difference. There was a subtle shift in how others treated her now. Ground crews greeted her with a little more respect. Younger pilots listened more carefully when she spoke. Even senior officers seemed to measure their words, as though recognizing they were speaking to someone who had faced down both nature and an enemy, and returned victorious. Rodriguez noticed it too. One afternoon, while they were reviewing flight plans, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know you've ruined it for the rest of us. Now anytime there's bad weather, they'll be looking at us like, well, Nix flew through."
During one briefing for a night strike in the same mountain range, an officer paused and glanced at her before starting. "Captain Castalanos, I assume you're aware of the weather pattern moving in?" Nix nodded. "Already checked. It's manageable for now, but if it worsens, I'll make the call." The officer gave a slight smile. "We trust your judgment." It was a short exchange, but it spoke volumes. In a world where split-second decisions could cost millions in equipment and human lives, having your judgment trusted was the highest form of respect. Still, she never let it go to her head. She kept training hard, refining skills, and flying as often as possible. She knew that one good mission didn't guarantee the next would go the same way. The storm mission had ended well, but she never forgot that luck had played a part. Preparation could stack the odds, but there was always the element you couldn't control. Sometimes, late at night, she'd replay the mission in her mind. Not to relive the glory, but to analyze it, thinking through every choice, every maneuver. She would ask herself if there was a better way she could have done it. That was how she stayed sharp. Rodriguez once caught her doing it in the ready room. "You're still picking apart that storm run, aren't you?" he said with a chuckle. She gave a small shrug. "You don't stop learning just because you survived." That was the part people didn't see. They saw the confidence, the skill, the results. They didn't see the constant self-critique, the endless search for ways to improve. For Nix, that was as much a part of the job as flying. It wasn't long before she was called to another high-risk mission. Different circumstances, different location, but the same core principle. Someone needed help, and the weather didn't care. As she walked out to the tarmac that day, past the rows of aircraft and crew working in the noise and bustle of the flight line, she glanced toward the mountains. They were calm now, bathed in sunlight. But she knew better than to trust appearances. Out there, storms could form faster than you could prepare. She checked her A-10 with the same attention to detail as always, running her hands over the cold metal, making sure every panel and bolt was in place. Preparation was non-negotiable. Before climbing in, she tapped the side of the fuselage twice, a small ritual she'd picked up years ago. Maybe it was superstition. Maybe habit. Either way, it was her way of saying, "Let's bring them home." The crew finished fueling the Warthog, the smell of jet fuel mixing with the sharp scent of metal and oil. Martinez gave her a thumbs up from below, his helmet shielding him from the steady wind. She returned the nod, pulling herself into the cockpit. The familiar weight of the harness settled across her shoulders as she secured it. The mission brief played in her mind. Enemy positions dug into rough terrain, weather on the edge of grounding conditions, limited time before friendly forces would be overrun. It wasn't the same as the SEAL rescue, but the stakes were still high. Her headset came alive with the voice of the tower. "Storm 01, you're cleared for startup." She brought the systems online in practiced order. Displays lit up, gauges came alive, and the steady hum of the engines grew to a deep, reassuring vibration. Outside, ground crew cleared the area, their yellow vests bright against the dull gray sky. The tower updated her on the weather. Winds gusting to 40 knots, visibility fluctuating, pockets of turbulence. She filed the information away without comment. It was far from ideal, but not enough to stop her. Rodriguez's voice came through on the secure channel. Storm 02 ready when you are. Nix checked her readouts, then replied, We'll take off in sequence. Follow my lead and keep your spacing tight through the passes. Copy that, Rodriguez said, his tone steady but with that edge of anticipation that came before every mission. The Warthog rolled forward, the nose wheel bumping slightly over seams in the concrete. The runway stretched ahead, a narrow ribbon into the uncertain sky. Storm 01, cleared for takeoff, came the tower's final call. She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the aircraft surge with raw power. The acceleration pressed her into the seat as the engines roared, propelling the A-10 down the strip. The moment the wheels left the ground, the world shifted into that familiar tunnel of focus. Everything outside the mission parameters faded away. They climbed into the gray, the clouds swallowing the horizon. Turbulence met them almost immediately, the air jerking and shoving the plane in unpredictable bursts. Nix kept her movement smooth, letting the aircraft ride through rather than fighting it. Rodriguez checked in from behind. Still with you. They pushed on toward the mountains, jagged peaks soon appearing on the radar. The passes ahead were narrow, the kind that demanded absolute precision. Flying here left no room for mistakes. The target coordinates came through encrypted. Friendly forces had set up defensive positions on a ridge, but were under constant fire from multiple enemy positions. The terrain made it impossible for ground vehicles to reach them in time. Air support was their only chance. Nix studied her targeting display, already planning her approach. The wind in the passes was unpredictable, funneled through gaps in the peaks at dangerous speeds. It would make stable firing runs difficult. Storm 02 will come in from the west, low and fast, she instructed. We'll split after the first pass and rejoin over the ridge. Understood, Rodriguez confirmed. The ridge came into view through the cloud breaks, a scar of rocky ground dotted with the shapes of men hunkered behind whatever cover they could find. Muzzle flashes blinked from multiple points along the surrounding slopes. Storm 01 in hot, Nix called, diving into her first run. Her targeting system locked onto enemy positions, and she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8's deep rolling growl filled the cockpit as shells tore through the hillside. Dirt and debris exploded into the air. She pulled up sharply, climbing back into the cover of cloud. Rodriguez's voice came next. Storm 02, target engaged, making my pass. Through her scope, she saw his rounds tear into another cluster of enemy positions, forcing them to scatter. The friendly ground commander's voice broke through. Storm, you've got them moving. Pressure from the east side still heavy. Copy, we'll make another run, Nix replied. They banked hard, lining up again. The wind shoved at the aircraft, trying to push them off course, but Nix held steady. Her second burst chewed through the enemy's eastern position, silencing the gunfire from that side. East side clear, she called. Status on the ridge? Improved, but north slope still active, the ground commander reported. Nix and Rodriguez coordinated their final passes, trading attack runs to keep the enemy pinned. Each dive required absolute focus. One slip, one gust too strong, and the mission could end in disaster. When the last enemy fire faded, Nix pulled into a holding pattern, scanning the area for movement. Ground, you are clear for now. Hold position until reinforcements arrive. The reply came back tight but grateful. Copy, Storm. Couldn't have held without you. Fuel check. Plenty left for the return, though not enough to linger unnecessarily. Storm 02, we're heading home, Nix called. The trip back through the passes was smoother now, the wind having eased slightly. Even so, they flew with the same caution, weaving between the mountains until the open plains spread out before them. Rodriguez spoke up on the private channel. Nice work out there. Felt a little like old times, didn't it? Nix smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed on her instruments. Let's hope not too often. Once in a while is enough. Back at Bagram, they landed without incident. The ground crew moved in quickly, securing the aircraft and beginning post-flight checks. Martinez met her at the ladder. "Clean run?" he asked. "As clean as it gets," she answered, climbing down. She filed her mission report with the same straightforward tone she always used. No drama, no boasting, just the facts. Later that night, she sat alone in the ready room, reviewing the day's footage. Every shot, every maneuver, every second of decision-making was replayed. She noted what worked, where timing could have been sharper, how wind patterns had shifted mid-run. The mission was over, but the learning never stopped. The footage ended and Nix leaned back in her chair, the quiet hum of the ready room filling the space around her. Outside, the night air carried a chill, and the mountains stood dark against the horizon. She had been in Afghanistan long enough to know that quiet rarely lasted. She thought about the last few months, the storm rescue, the follow-up missions, the constant cycle of briefings, sorties, and debriefs. Each one carried its own risks, but none had yet matched the raw intensity of that night in the mountains. Still, she knew it was only a matter of time before another mission pushed her to the edge again. Rodriguez stepped into the room, a file tucked under his arm. "You've got another one," he said, dropping it on the table. Nix flipped it open. The situation was clear. A joint patrol had been ambushed deep in a valley system, cut off from their convoy. Enemy forces were pressing in, and terrain made evacuation almost impossible without air cover. Weather was, as always, a factor. Low clouds, shifting winds, and occasional bursts of rain. "When?" she asked. "Wheels up in 30, Rodriguez replied. She stood, closing the file. "Then we'd better get moving." At the flight line, the A-10s stood ready, their dark shapes hulking under the faint glow of floodlights. Ground crew worked in the shadows, refueling, arming, and checking systems. Martinez was already at her aircraft, double-checking the panels along the wing. "Everything's green," he reported, "but you'll want to watch your approach. The wind's kicking up in the valleys." "I'll keep that in mind," Nix said, climbing into the cockpit. The harness clicked into place, and the familiar pre-flight ritual began. Switches flipped, systems hummed to life, and the engine's growl rose steadily. Rodriguez's voice came over the channel. "Storm 02 ready." "Storm 01 ready," she responded. "Let's roll." The takeoff was smooth enough, but once they climbed toward the valley, turbulence began to shove at the aircraft. Nix adjusted, keeping her movements measured. The valley ahead was a maze of ridges and gullies, each one capable of hiding both friendly and hostile forces. The patrol's coordinates appeared on her display. They were pinned down on a rocky slope, taking fire from positions above and below them. The situation was deteriorating fast. "Storm 01 in hot," she called, banking toward the first target cluster. Her rounds tore through the rocks, sending plumes of dust into the air. Rodriguez followed with a second run, hitting enemy positions on the opposite slope. The ground commander's voice cut in, tense but steady. "Storm, good hits. Still taking fire from the ridgeline." Nix circled, lining up her next pass. The wind funneled through the valley with unpredictable bursts, forcing her to correct constantly. She fired again, watching enemy muzzle flashes vanish under the impact. "Ridgeline clear," she reported. "Any movement left?" "Negative," came the reply. "We're stable for now, but they'll regroup." She knew what that meant. Holding the enemy off was only half the job. The patrol still needed extraction, and the terrain would complicate it. Command patched in a helicopter unit willing to attempt a pickup. The flight path would take them directly through the same unstable weather pockets Nix and Rodriguez had just navigated. "Storm 01, we'll need you on overwatch while we go in," the helo pilot said. "Understood," Nix replied. "I'll guide you in." She and Rodriguez coordinated their positions, one above, one below the cloud layer, watching for any enemy movement. The helicopter began its slow approach, buffeted by the same shifting winds that had plagued their runs. Halfway in, the pilot's voice crackled. "We've got movement on the ridge to the north." Nix banked sharply, locking onto the heat signatures moving toward the landing zone. She opened fire, cutting the group off before they could get within range. "Clear to continue," she said. The helicopter touched down, the patrol scrambling aboard under the rotor's pounding rhythm. The moment they lifted off, Nix shifted to cover their retreat, scanning for any last threats. "Storm, we're clear of the valley," the helo pilot called. "Copy, we're heading back." The return flight was quieter, the worst of the turbulence left behind. When they landed, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first signs of dawn creeping over the mountains. Martinez was there to meet her, just as he always was. "Looks like another clean run," he said, though his eyes scanned the aircraft for damage. "Just a few bumps," she replied. "Nothing serious." Later, in the ready room, Rodriguez dropped into the chair across from her. 3 missions in 2 weeks. You trying to set a record?" She smirked. "Just doing the job." But inside, she knew it was more than that. Each mission reinforced a truth she had learned long ago. When someone needed help, hesitation could cost lives. Whether it was a rescue in a deadly storm or a firefight in a narrow valley, the answer had to be the same. Go. That night, as she prepared her gear for the next day, she paused for a moment, looking at the photo in her locker. 6 men, smiling, alive because of a decision she had made in the worst conditions imaginable. It was a reminder that every mission, no matter how routine it might seem, could be the one that mattered most. And she intended to be ready. 2 days later, the weather shifted again. Dark clouds rolled in over the mountains, heavy with the promise of rain and trouble. Pilots on the line kept one eye on the sky as they worked through regular maintenance flights. Nix was in the operations center, reviewing recent intelligence on enemy activity in the southern valleys when the alert came through. A convoy returning from a supply run had been ambushed on a remote road. Several vehicles were disabled, and enemy fighters were moving in from high ground. The initial assessment was grim: limited cover for the convoy, open lines of sight for the attackers, and no immediate ground reinforcements. The only option was air support. The duty officer glanced at Nix as he relayed the details. "Weather's already dropping visibility in the area to less than a mile. Wind gusts at the ridge are hitting 50 knots. It's going to be rough." Nix didn't hesitate. "I'll take it." Rodriguez, standing nearby, gave a half smile. "Here we go again." Within minutes, they were on the tarmac. Martinez met her with the usual efficiency, double-checking the fuel load and weapons configuration. "She's ready, Captain. Just watch the crosswinds on approach." Nix nodded, climbing into the cockpit. The startup sequence was as familiar as breathing. Switches, gauges, engine growl, the hum of systems coming online. She and Rodriguez taxied out together, cleared for immediate departure. The climb into the storm was jarring. Turbulence hit early, shaking the A-10 like it was caught in a giant's fist. The gray swallowed them, the horizon vanishing into a featureless haze. "Storm O2, still with you?" she asked over the intercom. "Still here," Rodriguez confirmed. "Barely." The convoy's distress beacon painted its position on her display. They were pinned near a sharp bend in the road, enemy fire coming from positions above them on both sides. Nix dropped lower, using the terrain as cover. The wind clawed at the wings, trying to push her off course, but she held steady. As soon as the ridge came into view, she rolled in for her first run. The GAU-8 roared, spitting shells into the enemy's position. Dirt and smoke exploded along the slope, breaking the attackers' lines. Rodriguez followed, hammering the opposite ridge. The convoy commander's voice came through, loud over the chaos. "Storm, you've got their attention, but we're still taking fire from the west side." "On it," Nix replied, swinging back around. She came in low, firing another burst that silenced the last heavy gun on the ridge. With the immediate threat neutralized, she shifted to overwatch. Ground, you're clear to move. Keep to the east route and stay tight. Copy, Storm. Moving now. The convoy began its slow retreat, weaving around the damaged vehicles. Enemy movement flickered on her scope, reinforcements trying to intercept. Nix cut them off with a final pass, scattering the fighters before they could get within range. Fuel was dipping toward the caution zone by the time they turned for home, but the weather on the return leg was marginally better. The base came into sight through thinning clouds, runway lights glowing faintly in the rain. Landing was still a fight. The crosswind shoved hard at the A-10 as it touched down, but the wheels held, the aircraft rolling out in a steady line. Martinez was waiting when she shut down the engines. "Looks like you had to work for that one," he said, eyeing the mud and scorch marks on the fuselage. "Earned my pay today?" she answered with a faint grin. The debrief was straightforward. No losses, minimal damage to the convoy, and the route cleared for future supply runs. On paper, it was just another mission. But Nix knew that for the men in those vehicles, it had been the difference between making it home and not. That evening, she found herself alone in the ready room again. The base had settled into its usual rhythm, engines in the distance, radios crackling with routine traffic, the muted clatter of tools in the hangars. She stared out the window toward the mountains. Somewhere out there, another call for help would come. It always did. Rodriguez's voice broke the quiet. "You ever think about slowing down?" She turned toward him. "You mean letting someone else take the rough ones?" "Something like that," he said with a small smile. She shook her head. "Not while I can still make a difference." He chuckled. "Didn't think so." Weeks later, word came down from higher command. Nix was being recommended for another commendation, not just for the storm rescue, but for a series of missions that had consistently put her in the toughest situations and brought her back with results. The formalities didn't matter much to her. The real measure was in the voices over the radio when the situation turned desperate, the way fear shifted to relief when they heard "storms inbound." On the day of the presentation, she stood in formation, the ceremony unfolding with military precision. Her name was called, the citation read, and the medal pinned in place. Cameras flashed, hands were shaken, and speeches were made. But her thoughts weren't on the stage. They were back in the cockpit, flying through lightning so bright it lit the mountains like daylight. They were with the SEALs huddled in the dark, waiting for help. They were with every convoy, every patrol, every pinned-down unit that had looked to the sky and seen her A-10 diving in. When it was over, she returned to the flight line. The Warthog was there, waiting, scarred from weather and battle, but ready. She ran a hand along the fuselage, feeling the cold metal under her fingers. Martinez approached, giving her a knowing look. "Guessing you're not planning on taking it easy after this." She smiled faintly. "Not my style." She climbed up, settled into the seat, and looked out across the runway. The sky was clear for now, but she knew how quickly that could change. Somewhere out there, another call would come. And when it did, she'd be ready to answer. Because for Captain Nix Castalanos, it was never just a mission. It was a promise, one she intended to keep no matter the storm.